When it comes to having command over the text, if there's any one sentence building skill that separates professional fiction writers from the droves of mediocre fiction writers, it's this one. If you examine the prose of master sentence writers, you'll inevitably find a writer with a mastery over loose modifying phrases, largely because they offer the writer tremendous flexibility in growing a sentence outward from its base clause. Sometimes called free modifiers, adjectival elongation, or cumulative syntax, any of these terms refers to the use of loose modifiers. So what are these spectacular loose modifiers, Ro? I'll tell you. They are types of phrases that can be added to a sentence to modify all the elements in the base clause, subject, predicate, or other information within the base. Essentially, they can be added to modify anything, hence the term loose or free. And if that's not enticing enough to an aspiring sentence wizard who loves flexibility, they are incredibly easy to learn to use. If used correctly, loose modifiers can help you grow tremendously fluid and easy to follow sentences, which is one of the reasons you'll find loose modifying phrases all over the sentences of our very best fiction writers' work. The basic formula for adding a loose modifying phrase is simple. A. Take your base clause. The bear ran up the tree. B. Subtract the period and add a comma. The bear ran up the tree, comma. C. Add an adjectival phrase that modifies part or all of the base clause. The bear ran up the tree, its claws tearing into the delicate bark. Looks pretty simple, right? It is. And once you've mastered the types of constructions that can form loose modifying phrases, you could theoretically stretch a sentence infinitely. The bear ran up the tree, its claws tearing into the delicate bark as the bees pursued, their wings buzzing furiously around the bear's broad body, his thrashing limbs shaking the trunk as he progressed, lumbering upward with power and madness, huffing in anger as the bees swarmed, stinging the bear everywhere as he ripped great divots into the wood, claws scrambling, reaching higher and higher, bending the thin green boughs near the top of the lurching trunk. You may not consider that an elegant sentence, I certainly don't, but it is grammatical, and it does demonstrate the principle. Take your base clause, add a comma plus a loose modifier, and repeat as necessary. Let's take another look at that long sentence about the bear. You may notice how each phrase relates to a phrase that precedes it. If this is done well, loose modifiers can be a good way to practice reader sensitivity as well. This is yet another advantage of loose modifiers. Note how the main thought at the end of one phrase can be carried right into the next phrase, taking the reader along without asking them to hold too much information in their short-term memory. Again, that sentence about the bear isn't high literary art, to be sure, and I wouldn't often write a sentence like it in a story, but for an 80-word sentence, it's not very difficult to follow. Loose modifiers can help you do that. So how do loose modifiers get formed? Not surprisingly, there are quite a few different ways that loose modifiers can be formed from a grammatical sense. We'll take a look here at 4 common ways to begin a loose modifying phrase, but it bears mentioning that this isn't an exhaustive list of the ways loose modifiers can be formed. They can be formed in any number of different creative ways. I illustrate these 4 because they're common and easy to learn to use, which should get you started. It is important to stress that the point here isn't to memorize each type of construction with the grammatical terminology that goes along with it. What we're trying to do is simply familiarize ourselves with some of the ways a loose modifying phrase can be formed. If you practice writing each form a few times, you'll begin to develop a sense for how these constructions work. There's a rhythm that will develop over time. It's a bit like learning scales in music. You play them repetitively at the beginning, and after a while, you get the hang of the sounds and the places the notes are on your instrument, and then you just begin to play. In the following examples, I'll use the same base clause so you can see how the different types of modifiers alter the sentence. As a tip of the cap to Hemingway, my base clause will be, "The boxer threw a punch." Note how basic my base clause is. It has a clear subject, an action verb, and an object. Simple base clauses like this offer the reader a vivid image that the writer can then elaborate on using subsequent modifiers. Clear, declarative base clauses are a reader's best friend. Here goes. 1. Beginning the modifying phrase with a verbal. Verbals are usually ed or ing forms of a verb that cannot complete a sentence on their own. I'll stress the verbals in the following examples. The boxer threw a punch, dropping his opponent to the canvas. The boxer threw a punch, driven more by self-preservation than by any fading hope for glory. The boxer threw a punch, lurching forward explosively as sweat jumped from his body. The boxer threw a punch, striking at his opponent's chin like the piston of some tremendous machine. Note how the verbal can lead to adding very different clarifying information that adds detail to the sentence, from simple actions to colorful descriptions to metaphors. 2. Beginning the modifying phrase with an article. The boxer threw a punch that would make boxing history. The boxer threw a punch, the bell finally calling an end to the epic battle. The boxer threw a punch, a hopeless jab into empty space. In the case of the article, it's introducing a noun or an adjective-noun pair that describes a specific element of the base clause. This is also an excellent way to practice reader sensitivity, as it tightly controls the reader's focus by reiterating exactly what is being modified. When tightly controlled like this, a string of loose modifying phrases can be both very long and very easy to follow for the reader. 3. Beginning the modifying phrase with a possessive pronoun referring to the base clause. The boxer threw a punch, his arms screaming with fatigue. The boxer threw a punch, its desperation signaling the end of his reign as champion. Similar to the case of the last construction, the possessive pronoun introducing a loose modifier reminds the reader exactly what is being modified while adding detail to that original element in the base clause. 4. Beginning the modifying phrase with an adverb. The boxer threw a punch, desperately trying to ward off the champion's advance. The boxer threw a punch, carefully measuring his staggering opponent for the final blow. We'll revisit this use of the adverb again in a few lessons, because quite a few writers of prose, many of them very prominent, seem to frown quite heavily on the adverb's use. But using an adverb to begin a loose modifier can be an effective way to both add detail and manage a pleasing rhythm in a long, flowing sentence. Stringing modifiers together. You should probably be able to guess where this is going next. We've seen how adding single modifying phrases to a base clause works. Now we're going to string them together to add more detail. It works the same way as the initial rules. Remember from earlier that the basic form for adding loose modifiers is simple. A, take your base clause, the bear ran up the tree. B, subtract the period and add a comma. C, add an adjectival phrase that modifies part or all of the base clause. The bear ran up the tree, its claws tearing into the delicate bark. Now this time we're going to add some more loose modifiers. Instead of putting a period at the end of the first modifying phrase, we're going to put a comma and keep adding information that provides more detail to the sentence. The bear ran up the tree, its claws tearing into the delicate bark as the bees pursued, their wings buzzing furiously around the bear's broad body, his thrashing limbs shaking the trunk as he progressed, lumbering upward with power and madness, huffing in anger as the bees swarmed. And that's how you expand sentences beyond the base clause using loose modifiers. It's worth practicing generating each of these constructions like musicians practice their scales until they become almost second nature. Then move on to putting them together. It won't be long before you're building sentences you never thought yourself capable of producing. But there are a few pitfalls to be aware of. There are 2 common mistakes to watch out for when using loose modifying phrases. 1. That they are phrases. Loose modifiers cannot be independent clauses, otherwise all you've done is create a comma splice, which is another term for a run-on sentence. Make sure your loose modifier is not an independent clause. Run-ons confuse readers. Instead of getting what they think will be clarifying or detailing information about the base clause or another modifier, the reader gets a whole new base clause. Then they're forced to pause to figure out which is the real base clause in the sentence. The second common problem with loose modifiers is called a dangling or misplaced modifier. This happens when the modifying phrase modifies the wrong thing, or something that's implied by the sentence but not stated directly. At times, the dangling modifier can be totally overlooked, as they often seem to make sense in some way. But sometimes they're nonsensical and even comical when you notice them. Take the following dangling modifier. Having won the championship, the team plane departed for Boston. Of course, out of context, this sentence seems nonsensical. Unless the team was competing in a competition for best team plane, most likely there's something off with this sentence. One of the things that's tricky with dangling and misplaced modifiers is that often they seem much more reasonable in context. Consider the following. It was almost a given in that seemingly endless moment the ball hung in the air. Of course it would clear the wall. There'd been an air about the soon-to-be champions the entire summer, a swagger, a certainty. Stepping onto the jetway earlier that afternoon, the manager told the pilots to keep the engines warm. Their enigmatic center fielder boasted during warm-ups that he hadn't even packed a change of underwear. Now their miracle season was complete. Having won the championship, the team plane departed for Boston. There was enough champagne on board to drown a herd of elephants, and the party wouldn't stop till the sun came up 2 days later. To my eyes, it's hardly noticeable in context. Often we'll pass right over dangling modifiers as readers because we'll make the same logical leap that the writer did when he first wrote that paragraph. That writer was obviously thinking about the team winning the championship. The moral of this story is to do your best to know exactly what your loose modifier is modifying, and make sure it's actually present in your base clause. At other times, the problem is distance. The item being modified is present, but it's far away from the modifier, or there's something else in between that makes it difficult for the reader to understand what the modifier is modifying. Here's an example of a misplaced modifier. The fox bolted when he saw the farmer making a break for the woods before 2 shots rang out. It should be pretty easy to spot the problem here. The modifier, making a break for the woods, is too far away from its referent, the fox. Making this sentence worse is the fact that the farmer is mentioned in between the noun and its modifier, giving the reader the sense that the farmer made a break for the woods, not the fox. Let's see if we can fix this misplaced modifier. When he saw the farmer, the fox bolted for the woods, making his escape before 2 shots rang out. Much better. The fox comes right before the loose modifier, making it less ambiguous and clearer to the reader. There are 2 good ways to deal with dangling or misplaced modifiers: rewrite or restructure. 1, we can rewrite the sentence so that the inferred element is present. Having won the championship, the team departed for Boston on their private plane. 2, we can restructure the sentence so that the problem with the loose modifier goes away. The team won the championship and the plane departed for Boston. Victory in hand once more, the team boarded their Boston-bound private plane and departed. So those are the basics of using loose modifying phrases. This is a skill that once mastered will add tremendous fluidity, flexibility, and clarity to your sentence writing chops. So go practice, and when you're ready to add some new moves, come back and see the kind of next level stuff you can do with loose modifiers.